and welcome to Postscript. I'm John Petersen from the Arlington Institute, and we're coming to you again as we do every month or so from Berkeley Springs here in the eastern panhandle of West Virginia near Washington and Baltimore. Postscript is our attempt to highlight some of the speakers that we bring here on a monthly basis for our Berkeley Springs Transition Talk series. Our transition talks are about major kind of contributing factors that are shaping and framing the extraordinary change that's going on in the world today. And so we typically feature speakers from all over the world that have something interesting and important to say about this amazing kind of change that is going to end up being a new human and a new world, as best we can tell. It's the most extraordinary change in the history of the planet. And so usually in this seat we have a visiting guest of one sort or another, but today, this weekend, I'm the guest. I am giving the presentation today on the future, and my guest, or my friend, my old friend Gary Sycalik, who is a futurist from way back and a collaborator in a number of the projects that we do here. I've asked him to come and have a conversation between the two of us about all things about the future and about the talk that I'm going to give. And so I'd like to introduce you to Gary Sycalik.
Good morning, John.
Hi, Gary.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, over to you.
Well, you obviously have looked at the future very extensively. I expect that you probably dream the future.
I do.
And in looking at all of these items and issues, and in the era of epic change, what would you consider to be one of the most important items or single areas that we as a civilization could consider in order to make our transition a better and easier way on our pathway?
Well, you've got to consider the kind of context and to be able to have a reasonable response to a question like that. Because obviously for different contexts and different situations, you're going to respond differently and you're going to have a different kind of imperatives. The context now, though, which we're going to talk about a little bit later today, is one that's really quite extraordinary, as you well know. You have at the same time things like climate change coming along, which I'm convinced is going to be a mini ice age, and it starts in 3 to 5 years and will run for about 3 decades. There's now science coming out, clear science coming out of Russia, saying that the sun is doing things that it hasn't done before, and that historically this turns into a cooling period, like the Maunder minimum in the past. And even NASA is starting to say that there's a direct correlation between what happens on the sun and what happens on the Earth's climate. And so, and we're at the end of the longest warm period in the last 415,000 years. And so we're kind of due for something like that. The significance of that, as you would also understand, is that when something like that happens, it changes everything. And it doesn't make any difference, what your orientation or what your political perspective or, philosophical orientation or whatever, is that everybody starts thinking about food and energy and how to stay warm, and the metabolism of the whole system changes, and initiatives that made a lot of sense earlier don't anymore. And so there's this kind of giant influence. It's almost a dampening in one sense, because this is going to mostly be in the northern latitudes, it seems. And so things will slow down, perhaps. I don't know, but it's going to make a big difference. And it's going to make a difference, particularly, as best we can tell, in terms of food. Because all of our food production is all based upon the assumption that the climate's going to do what it's always done and the seasons are going to happen the way they have and so on. And if that doesn't happen, then you don't have the varieties of food and such to grow in the new situation. And so there are going to be some interesting and profound, potentially, kind of impacts related to that. And at the same time, there's a whole bunch of other kind of things. We're going to talk a little bit this morning about the converging kind of factors that suggest from multiple sources that there is life off of this planet, that it's engaged with humans in one way or another, that our government and other governments have been engaged with this life, and that the number of people who are been related to and interacted are increasing, and that's a kind of a big deal if something like that would happen, because if it became public and it became obvious, then the notion of who we are as human beings and what our relationship is to the rest of the reality would be dramatically different, and so that would change things as well.
Do you think it would be useful to look at the oncoming events in two different ways? One of which has to do with essentially wild cards that we can't control, and the other is a category of items that we can control. Within the context of those that we can control, there are probably a few things that we can focus upon that will have long and significant ramifications in a positive manner. And if we looked at those possibilities and we subdivided those into two categories, one of which is technological and the other one has to do with how we perceive things, what would you say about one versus the other? How we perceive things and how we value things and so forth versus what technological innovations
Sure.
we create.
Yeah. Well, the technology is kind of fungible, if you will. It can be used for any of a number of things. In many cases, it has no particular orientation, value orientation. Science is agnostic about what they just say. They produce things and they do things, and they allow the society and other kind of parts of the system to kind of deal with it. And the problem with that is that we're in a period of exponential kind of change from a technological point of view. And so the kinds of things that are happening are just kind of amazing, because they pile on top of each other as this exponential curve increases in time. You've got clear indications from a number of directions of attempts and plans to embed nanobot kind of computers in people's brains and connect them directly to the cloud, to the internet. Well, then by 2030, Ray Kurzweil talks about. You've got genetic engineering and DNA kind of manipulation and engineering, to where now Vladimir Putin a couple of weeks ago talks about the fact that we're very close to being able to produce super soldiers that have no fear and have no pain and don't die don't bleed as much when they get hurt and so on. And so there are fundamental kind of things that are happening in terms of the technology side that are very hard to fully get your arms around. Your question is about how do you manage or how do you relate to all of this stuff, and a kind of a conventional approach to that is to say that you somehow understand or gain an understanding about what is going on and therefore are in a position to kind of respond appropriately. I would argue on one hand, and this goes to the what you can potentially control, I would argue that we're into a period of time that is so anomalous and that is so different than anything we've ever seen before, that our ability to either control it or to build strategies for how to effectively deal with it are really less than what we've been able to do in the past, and certainly less presume a degree of understanding and knowledge that we may well not have. I'm increasingly, I mean, we're in a period of time where increasingly it's uncertain what really is going on. You have manipulation and influences in the press and within different areas like science and politics and so on, and the combination of all of these things makes it, and the attempts to change and manipulate and shape them for political or economic or other kind of reasons makes it very, very hard to fully understand what is happening. And therefore, it seems to me that the mindset or the approach one has to take to this, which is largely one of how do you position yourself that you are most able to adapt to and be sensitive to and read the signals that come in and change to the moving environment. I think of it a little bit about kind of like if you got parachuted into Borneo or someplace like that, and you're in the middle of these groups that are kind of headhunters or whatever they are down in there, and if you went into that kind of environment saying, well, I know how it works in New York, and I'm going to move ahead and I'm going to influence and control this situation, you might end up being lunch. You know, the alternative is to be very permeable and very open and to be very sensitive and try to understand as you go into this new space what you can do and what it's going to be and what it might be, and be able to adapt yourself to that. And I think that in many ways that's what we need to do, is to rise to the occasion of becoming someone different than we've been in the past in order to effectively deal to this new world.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And one of the ways that I look at this subject is essentially as an analogy to the computer. We have hardware and we have software. And essentially the software controls the hardware.
Yeah.
And so we have humans on the planet, and we have humans that make technology. Within humans is an awareness, they have values, they have belief structure, and they have attitudes. And this is analogous to the software in my little model. And the technological arena is the hardware. And in our present society, we have a pivotal force oriented around funding and the commerce area that drives technology and technology development. The three laboratories, the academic, the commercial laboratories, and the government laboratories, essentially are influenced considerably by the amount of money and who's bringing it and what kind of ramifications that they have attached to it. So we definitely have a rapid technological advancement. It is just unbelievable. And my conclusion is that most people do not have a sense of the rapid development in the technological arena. I'm not so sure I do all the way. And that being the case, we also know that technology is driven by the software of human minds, but then it becomes an influence as a feedback mechanism that influences the people. It influences their attitudes, their principles, and so forth. So we have this dynamic that is constantly moving. Within that context, what is it that we as humans can do in our society in the United States that would be beneficial to bring about more balance and harmony to this feedback loop that is churning, moving, accelerating, and just being launched?
Well, let me come to that kind of circuitously by going back to the beginning and talking a little bit about context, because again, as the context changes, it influences the kind of options that are available, or at least the perspective of the options. One of the major kind of events that's apparently going on right now is that our solar system is moving into a different area of space. And this is an area of space that, if you would visualize it, would have into a cloud that has different energy, different energetics, different kind of characteristics. And they found this by a couple of satellites that are out on the leading edge of out beyond Pluto. And what that's doing, apparently, is influencing the sun and changing the behavior of the sun in ways that nobody's seen it for a long time. And the sun then is responding and affecting all of the planets in the solar system. And so there's climate change, significant climate change going on in all of the planets. The implications, though, are much broader than just climate, because we live in an all-electric world, effectively, that everything is electric. Everything is light, and a derivative of the basic light is electricity. And so there are these electrical and magnetic kind of interactions between all of the aspects. I mean, in simple kind of terms, you can walk into the room and you can say, oh, it's magnetic or it's electric, and we use those kind of metaphors, but they literally turn out to be the truth in terms of how people communicate and otherwise. And so what science, the very leading edge of science, is starting to find out is that these changes on the sun are affecting the human beings, and they are affecting human beings in terms of their DNA, and beginning to kind of activate strings of your DNA that have been dormant in the past, you might say. And in that process, what emerges is a new human being. So when they get turned on, what you've got is whole generations of young kids, for instance, that are starting to have 3 and 4 strands of DNA, where you and I and everybody else around here has only got 2 strands of DNA. And so what you've got is the emergence of a new human with new kinds of characteristics and new kind of abilities, and potentially as the species provides for the new exponential new environment that's got more technology and all of the other kind of things associated with it. And so when you consider it from that point of view, then the again, I guess I have to come back to say that these kinds of changes are happening so fast, and they're so strange, relatively strange from what we're familiar with, that you need to kind of, I'm impressed more recently that you're going to have to go out to young people, some of these new young folks who are plugged in quite a different kind of way to the larger kind of universe as well as the human condition, and start to understand from them better how they would suggest how you might effectively deal with and engage the present system. I've spent my whole life being a strategist and been trying to build strategic plans and things, and I still think in those kinds of terms, but this is a period of time where it doesn't lend itself to the conventional strategic planning as it's been in the past. It doesn't, strategic planning presumes an understanding of the underlying forces and the endpoints and the potential kind of contributing factors and the influences and so on. And many of those things are not as clear as they have been.
I concur on that. I differentiate also between strategic planning and process planning. And it seems to me at this time we would be well served if we would reevaluate our process. It also seems to me we have institutionalized many flaws in our previous thinking. And we have institutionalized that in many ways, academically, governance, and our societal structure and how it's planned and so forth. So I keep thinking about what unique thing we can do to enhance our process planning and to enhance our ability to adapt to some of these wild cards that you're talking about. And I classify them as wild cards because even though they have a high probability of occurring, we don't know for sure what is going on, including the Earth moving into a new sector of space where the vibrational field is different, which I also believe that has been happening for quite a while. And so from that standpoint of looking at the institutions, how could we reconfigure some of these institutional paradigms that would enable us to be more flexible and better adapt to these oncoming events from the horizon?
Well, I'm convinced that the existing kind of reality inevitably kind of collapses and implodes over time because it's based upon structural shortcomings or that are not able to effectively deal with the change, and that are based upon things like saying that humans are principally valued in terms of their economic contribution, and if you and discounts all other kinds of things like, you know, happiness and love and and what other the quality of life and so on, and the and so what has to emerge is first of all, I don't think you can save any of the old ones, and so there are a lot of well-meaning people who are running around trying to fix the economy or fix the environmental system or whatever, and I don't think you can do that through the existing structures. I think that's well-meaning, and it's important that people try to do that, and if that's their job in life, that's what they should do. But I think ultimately what happens is that we're at this extraordinary kind of transition between one era and another one, and that the old one collapses and a new one emerges that has fundamentally different kind of characteristics than the old one. And so my interest is more in trying to how to define and develop and think about the new world and how that might operate, and what are the contributing factors and how this new environment would could behave, than it is to try to fix on the other one. And we're out of time here, and we can come back and talk about that in the next segment. But there's a wonderful kind of opportunity here to build a model for a new world rather than trying to kind of deal with the old one.
Yeah, and I have observed that the new paradigm emerges out of the old paradigm. And it gives birth as it is decaying and deconstructing.
Yeah.
And my focus has been for a long time what actions we could take as a society, as humankind, to midwife this new birth.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about that in the next segment.
Okay.
Because we're out of time. But thanks so much. It's really great to have you here and be with us. And thank you for being with us here at Postscript. We do this on a fairly regular basis, and we have a very interesting guest, and we hope you'll come back and visit us. And you can learn more about the Transition Talks, our speaker series, at transitiontalks.org. And we come to you, as we do all the time, from beautiful Berkeley Springs in the mountains of West Virginia. And I'm John Petersen from the Arlington Institute. Do come back.